Welcome to our latest episode in Ireland's Native Trees. In this episode, we're going to talk about something that isn't strictly a tree, of course, but you have to talk about if you're talking about Irish trees, and that is the amazing species ivy. Like everything around you, like all the diversity in this beautiful Rathmullen Wood Nature Reserve that we're in, the big problem if you're living under giant oak trees or giant beech trees, which are further back in the forest, is light availability. Everything here is, of course, competing for the resources, competing for food, competing for space, but competing for light. And light can be completely dominated by the big trees that are around us. Big oak trees, big beech trees, big deciduous trees can block up to 90% of the light availability. Ivy has a clever trick for getting around that. What ivy is able to do is it's able to use the trees or whatever tall surrounding things are there. It's able to grab onto them and climb up and use them as a ladder to be able to reach up to be able to get more light. And of course, if it can get more light, well, then it can photosynthesize more efficiently. And then it's able to have the energy to be able to produce its flowers and produce its berries. Ivy often gets a bad name for this habit of using trees and using lampposts and often even buildings or walls, using them to climb up. This ivy here, this old ivy trunk that's been growing up this mighty oak tree for a very long time. If anything, it's helping to support this tree. Its root system that digs down into the ground isn't competing with the roots of the oak. The oak are able to spread out much further and much deeper. Its ability to be able to climb up the tree, to grab onto the tree, doesn't damage the tree. In fact, as the oak tree gets wider every year, putting on that new ring of growth each year, the ivy tree is able to expand with that and grow with that and keep using the tree. It's in the ivy's interest for this tree to keep standing. It's in the ivy's interest to be able to reach up and get as much of that light as possible. So you can see some of the younger ivy just starting to grow up here, reaching, taking its long journey all the way up to the light. And there are little advantageous roots that come out of these stems here. And these roots, they come and they grip onto the little gaps in the bark. And out of those roots come little hair-like projections, as thin as my own hair. And they grab onto the little cracks in the bark or the cracks in the brickwork or whatever it is that it's climbing up. And then the tree is able to produce a biological glue-like substance. And that glue-like substance binds that root, which keeps it stuck on quite well. Doesn't take anything from the tree, but it's gripped onto the bark in a really tight way. And then the last trick that the ivy has in this amazing climbing process is it dries out that little mini root system that's coming out of the stem. And by drying it out, by desiccating it, that makes it shrink and shrivel, which effectively shrink wraps this ivy branch or this ivy stem onto the bark of the tree. It pulls it in really tight. So the ivy puts out a little root and grabs onto something, which then puts out little tiny hairs and a little bit of glue, fixes them onto the bark, and then dries the whole thing out, which binds it in, keeps it nice and tight, and it makes it so difficult to remove. So by its very nature of wrapping itself around things, seeking that upward journey all the time, and of course, because it's evergreen, those dark leaves, it provides wonderful shelter all year round for all sorts of different creatures. Huge numbers of invertebrates, little insects, little spiders and other characters shelter in amongst the little cracks in the bark, underneath the leaves. And a huge amount of insects rely on the flowers, and then an awful lot of birds rely on the fruit. And they eat up the berries, and they spread those around about as they fly off. And ivy being an edge of forest plant, it's looking for that opportunity. When there's a little gap in the canopy above us, it grabs onto a tree and grows up as fast as it can. But it has many enemies, many things that would like to try and eat the leaves. And you can see by the grazing line here how high up that this tree has been grazed, that the ivy has been grazed off the edge of this tree. And that tells us the kind of animals that are in here. We're in a nature reserve, so there's no sheep and there's no cattle. So this must be red deer. They're about the only wild native animal that can reach up this high above my head height. And red deer will eat up these leaves all day long when they get the chance. But ivy is tough, it's resilient, it's growing up here, and above the deer grazing line, it has spread out its leaves, reaching for that light as it continues its journey upwards. So ivy doesn't strangle the tree, nor does it compete with the tree. If anything, this big thick ivy is helping to support this tree. However, because it's evergreen, once the tree is very old, that extra weight of leaf and branch up above might hasten its demise, might mean that it's going to tumble a little bit earlier if a big storm comes. But it could be argued in the case of the likes of this, that it's helping to keep this tree upright. People often clear ivy in the hope that they're going to save some of the trees that are along the roadside or in their gardens. But remember, the ivy isn't really competing with the trees, and it provides so much shelter. So many bats will live under here, so many bugs will live under here all year round. It's a very important habitat. To identify ivy is very easy. It's an evergreen leaf, and like so many of the evergreen leaves, it's pumped full of all sorts of toxins, and it's a very, very tough leaf. It's tough to be able to endure the frosts and the cold of the winter, and it has those various toxins in it to be able to withstand any attacks from insects. And if you're out there 12 months of the year, you need to be able to withstand all sorts of attacks, both climatic and biological. The new leaves on ivy, or the younger growth, tends to have 3 little lobes, sometimes 5, but it's quite pointed. And you can see the stems in the inside of the leaf. They really stand out prominently. Quite small at this stage, but they can get a good bit bigger, up to about the size of the palm of your hand. And then when ivy is ready to flower, well, then the leaf takes a different shape altogether. It forms a more rounded kind of character, still has a little point on the end, and still has that deep, deep green. Ivy does things the other way around compared to a lot of different plants. Ivy has its flowers quite late in the year, September into October time. And then once those flowers are pollinated, the berries appear around about February or March. And this is hugely important. They have a very open flower, this tiny little light greenish, yellowish flower. It's very open, very easy to access both the pollen and the nectar. And that's hugely important for the hoverflies, for the queen bumblebees that need to feed before they hibernate for the winter, for the queen wasps that need to hibernate before the winter, and for so many other characters. The little holly blue butterfly. It relies on holly trees in springtime, but then the second generation lays its eggs into these little characters here, and it needs the ivy. Ivy provides a huge amount of sustenance for so many different insects, which of course are the backbone of so much of our life. Late in the year when there's not much other food for them. And then all of these little pollinated flowers will turn into berries. Inside those berries will be seeds. And the birds, when they're really struggling for food, when they've eaten up all their stashed food over the winter, or all the other berries, the hawthorn and the holly, are depleted, ivy comes into its own and starts producing these dark, dark blue, nearly black berries, which the birds will eat. And of course, as they fly around, they spread the seeds. Ivy is a hugely important plant, hugely important woodland plant, always associated with trees. And of course, so much of Ireland was once upon a time a forest, and now less than 3% of Ireland is native trees. And an awful lot of Ireland's woodland habitat today is linear. It's in the form of hedgerows or tree lines. So hence ivy thrives, because it likes that edge, it likes that little space where it can get some extra light. But don't be in a hurry to chop it down. Don't be in a hurry to neaten up your garden or neaten up your park, because remember, ivy supports so much life, giving life in the autumn to our insects for next year, giving life in the spring for our birds to see them through the summer before their breeding season, and then providing shelter all year round for the wrens, the robins, the bats, the spiders, and so many. Wonderful plant, ivy, giving a little bit of evergreen life into your garden all year round.